So the topic today is about how to get clients for your business by speaking to groups. Now, just so you know, in the on today's episode, we're going to focus a lot about how to set yourself up, set up your authority so that when you do speak, you're going to have credibility and people are going to actually listen to you. And then next week on the next episode, I'm going to show you a few simple places that you can go and speak and generate income from it or generate clients and customers from it. So that's how I'm breaking down the two sessions. But if you happen to be a great speaker, there are a number of ways that you can get clients for your business by just going out and speaking. And by the way, if you aren't a great speaker yet, then just keep tuning in because we can help you with that as well. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that your goal when you're creating this content is to build your authority on a specific topic. So once you do that, then you're going to create an endless supply of speaking opportunities and an endless supply of clients. But you have to set up the credibility first, the authority first. So your authority really depends on a couple of different things. First, when people do a Google search for you, for your name, or in a lot of cases, it might be your company's name. When they do a Google search for your company or for you, what do they find? You know, most everybody is going to do that, by the way. That's a really, really simple way to do a little bit of due diligence. And that's usually a first step. So if, for instance, if you're applying for a job and guess what, that person who is interviewing you is most likely going to Google you, right? They're going to put your name into Google and they're going to see what's out there. When you want to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, then that connection, that person who you are trying to connect with is most likely going to Google you. So this is true, by the way, with potential clients and customers. Anybody that is meeting you for the first time, when they hear about you or when they hear about your company, that's kind of the first step. They're going to do a quick little internet search. They're going to put your name into Google and see what's there. The things that they find are either going to build your authority or they're going to diminish your authority in their eyes. So the good news is that you've got total control over what potential customers or clients find about you on the internet. And so what we're going to talk about in this episode are just a few simple things that you can do to really build up your authority so that when people do searches on you, they see that you're the expert. They see that you have an expertise in this area. So the first thing that you want to do to kind of set this up or set the stage is that you want to use writing and speaking to increase your, what I call internet authority. You want to build that trust with potential customers or with potential new clients before they even speak with you or before they even hear you present anything. So before I really get into the speaking part, which we'll focus on next week, let's start with ways that you can actually increase that authority. I'll give you a really quick example. I mean, I had a student a couple of years ago who wanted to, he had a great goal, by the way. He wanted to help inner city kids make better decisions. He grew up in a pretty tough neighborhood and he wanted to give back to his community. And it sounded like a worthy goal, but after chatting with him for just a few minutes, it was really quick. I mean, it was a real easy for me to kind of see that the guy had absolutely no experience working with kids ever, right? He didn't even have kids of his own, right? And in fact, he currently worked as a mechanical engineer. And so throughout his entire career, he'd never set out to be like even a supervisor or a manager at his company. He was, frontline worker. So he'd never coached anybody. He'd never trained anybody. He'd never taught anything to anybody. And since he had no experience working with kids anyway, I mean, he had basically decided to venture into this new arena in which he had absolutely no experience. And so that's not really a goal. That's a pipe dream, right? That's my point is that before you set off to be a speaker or a writer, you really want to take time to develop your expertise. Like for instance, this engineer, he would have had he could have been a fantastic speaker on topics such as how to cut your energy costs in summer months. I mean, that's something that a lot of people, a lot of organizations would be interested in hearing about. And he had an expertise on that. And because if he had spoken on that, since he was an expert at that topic, he probably would have done pretty well. But on the other hand, I'll give you a more positive kind of result. Though I had a friend who he was attending an accounting conference years ago. So the guy was he was a bookkeeper, and he had a specific expertise on a type of software that was really popular at the time. And he decided to go through a breakout session at one of the conventions to get to continuing education and stuff like that. And the only reason, by the way, that he went to this specific breakout session was because he knew the speaker. He was a mutual friend of ours. So basically, we all knew each other. So during the question and answer part, somebody in the audience asked a specific question about that software package that my friend was skilled at or had an expertise at. And the speaker, the guy who was leading the breakout session, actually didn't have any experience using that. And so he called on our other friend to answer the question. And interestingly, like 20 minutes later, both my friend and the speaker were now still answering questions together. So, and that was probably 12 years or so ago when that occurred. And that was the first time that he had ever done any type of speaking. It was just a question that got asked of him in a breakout session. But because he did so well and he enjoyed it and the people liked him, the next year when the convention occurred, he asked to be a breakout speaker, a guest speaker in another breakout session. 6 years later, he's traveling around the world teaching other people about how to do all kinds of things related to leadership and all that kind of stuff. So basically, he was an expert at the time about that software package. And so he was able to speak about that thing. And then everything else he kind of studied along the way. So he gained his skill at speaking, talking about something that he knew inside and out and did really well with it. And so then as his expertise grew, he was able to speak on different topics. And that's what I would suggest that you do. So the most important thing to kind of keep in mind about this is that you want to write and speak about topics where you know that content inside and out, just like what my friend did. If you know it very well, you're going to do well. If you don't feel like you're there yet, then just study or train a little bit more, and that's going to help you build your expertise. So the next thing that is really important about this is that you want to start by writing down your words of wisdom, and remember that you are the expert. So don't let that word expert throw you off, by the way. That's one of the things that happens a lot in our classes. We'll ask people to speak on something that they know inside and out, that they are an expert on, and people will go, oh, I'm not an expert, right? My boss is the expert, right? And that's one of those things that can kind of throw you off, because anything that you've done for a considerable length of time is something that you are an expert at. I'll give you a personal example. Like, for instance, I love baseball. I mean, I just love it. I think it's a really cool sport. I love the thought process and the statistics and all that kind of stuff. I never played the game myself, though. I mean, I grew up in a very rural part of Arkansas, and there were no little leagues anywhere around me in my neighborhood anyway. There weren't any select teams as those things. I don't even know if those things existed back then, but in my high school, the kids that were actually on the baseball team, they'd been playing by the time that I got up to the point where I could join a team. The kids that were actually playing that sport had been playing for 10 years. They'd been playing since they were 4 or 5, right? And on the other hand, I'd never actually taken the time to learn how to catch or throw or bat, right? So those things are really important to the game, and I didn't know how to do any of those things. So I was way behind their expertise. Now, my son, on the other hand, Ben, he loves baseball too. He's just like me. He loves baseball. However, he started playing t-ball at 4 years, when he was 4 years old. So and by the way, I didn't have the expertise when he was 4 and 5 and 6. I didn't have an expertise or skill at that game, but I learned by teaching him. A lot of it came off of YouTube, but basically I was learning as he was learning. I was learning how to throw when he was learning how to throw. And so my skill started to grow a little bit. So in his 4th year, so that probably would have been, he was probably about 9 or 10 at the time. The coach of his team needed some help, so he asked me to be his assistant coach. He'd seen me kind of coaching not only Ben, but some of the other kids, helping them out with batting practice and stuff like that, all the stuff that I'd learned to do in the last 3 or 4 years. And then, so he asked me to be the assistant, and I did pretty well doing that. We had a winning team, and I learned a lot from that that coach who, played that coach ended up playing. He played baseball anyway in the Marine Corps and some other places, so he kind of knew the game a little bit better than I did. So I learned from him as well. Well, 6 years later, I now have a decent expertise in coaching baseball. It took me a decade to get it, but I kind of have a pretty decent expertise. Now, granted, I don't have nearly as much credibility as an ex-major leaguer might have, or even a minor league player might have. However, there are tons of parents out there who have never played the game themselves and who have kids that are taking up the sport. And so in that arena, I'm an expert on that topic to them anyway. So step one is that you want to begin to write down your expertise. This is going to help you organize your thoughts better. In the beginning, don't worry so much about the quality of the writing. That's not as important. You really just want to start out by brainstorming your knowledge about the actual topic so that you can organize your thoughts. Do that first, and then you'll be able to put together your thoughts in a little bit better way. So the next step is that one of the things that you have to realize is that whether you are writing or speaking, you want to use the same type of organization structure for your content. People receive content in a certain way. So whether they're reading it or whether they're hearing it, it should be very similar. Like, for instance, one of my speakers, guy who's on my staff, he once came to me and said, "Hey, Doug, I love speaking. And in fact, I think I have a gift for it," and which he did. Great, fantastic speaker. But he finished by saying, "However, I know that writing is really not my strong suit." And I was floored when he said that, because this is a guy who had been teaching the Fearless Presentations class for my customers. He taught hundreds of different of people every single year for probably at that point maybe 3 or 4 years. So he was an expert not only at speaking but also helping other people speak more effectively. So I was kind of a little taken back by what he was telling me. And so I paused a second before responding to him. And then I said, okay, so he thinks he's really good at speaking, which he is, but maybe not as good at writing. Let's see if I can prove to him that he's good at writing as well. So basically all I asked him to do was design a speech on the topic that we were discussing. So the context of where this conversation came up is that he and I were creating a workshop, and he was a little uncomfortable doing the creative part, the writing of the workshop, because we were putting together manuals and handouts and stuff like that, and he didn't feel like he had a great expertise in that, right? And so what I told him to do was, I said, "Hey, why don't you take this topic and create a presentation for this specific topic?" And he got a little excited because that's what he was an expert at. And then after he designed the presentation, I had him practice that speech with me. And without him knowing, I turned my phone camera on. And I just kind of set it down underneath us as he was speaking. And then when he finished giving the presentation, did a fantastic job, by the way, I stopped the video and I texted it to him, and I just put the words underneath the video. "Hey, can you please transcribe this for me? Can you transcribe this video for me?" And maybe an hour or so later, I got a response from him. I think he actually got the message, because whether you're writing content or speaking content, the structure is exactly the same. The first thing that you want to do is create a topic that has a benefit to the audience. Then second, you want to identify 3 to 5 really most important items, or most important points or bullet points that the audience needs to know about the topic. And then finally, use stories, analogies, and other types of evidence to prove to your audience that your bullet points are true. So now that you've started creating some really good written content, then you want to combine similar posts into booklets or books, or even a series, whether it's a blog series or a recording, an audio series, video series, whatever it is. I'll give you a really cool example of how, when you do this, it can have some fantastic benefits for you to generate new customers, new clients. So back when COVID first hit, this was back in March or so, April of 2020. meetings, classes, everything, they were being postponed and eventually canceled left and right. So as a result, many of my speakers, many of the folks who kind of work for my company we had a lot of free time on our hands. I mean, we were like, all of a sudden we had no time and we went to having nothing but time on our hands. So we decided that, hey, this is a good time to actually do some content creation. This is a good time. When are we ever going to have this kind of opportunity again? So since we weren't speaking as much, we decided to write more blog posts and create new content and courses. And eventually we created a lot of virtual classes and all kinds of stuff like that. But one of my instructors, her name is Candace Cox. She's out of Las Vegas. She was fascinated by how the casinos were adapting to what was going on. They were what she called reinventing themselves. So basically, things that casinos were most known for were kind of going by the wayside, and they were creating new stuff in order to adapt to this changing environment that was going on. So just so you know, Candace, she is an expert coach. She's also an expert presenter. Her background, though, is in radio. It's not in reinvention, right? So she's a professional spokesperson, that kind of thing, right? So she had never before starting to write these blog posts, she had actually never done a whole lot of intensive studying on how to reinvent yourself or how to adapt to a changing marketplace or any of that kind of stuff. But she is an expert coach, right? So the reason why this topic was interesting to her, though, was because she did cut her teeth in the radio industry, AM FM radio back in the 90s, I guess. Back in the golden age of radio, that would have been the 60s, 70s, 80s, I guess. That was when turntables were in radio. They played records, vinyl records, right? And what she noticed was that, because she came in toward the latter part of that golden age, that when CDs came on, when they arrived on the scene, that many of the old timers, the folks that were older than her at the time, these disc jockeys, they really resisted that change. And they would say things that were just absolutely ridiculous. They'd say things like, no, vinyl sounds better. Which I don't know if you ever heard vinyl records, but that is not true, right? They say that, but man, vinyl skips and there's all kinds of weird, it's crackling, all kinds of stuff. What we hear now through our iPods and AirPods and all that kind of stuff, that it sounds so much better than what anything that came out in AM FM radio days, right? But just a few short years after this initial reinvention of that industry occurred, a lot of those disc jockeys that resisted that CD change, they were replaced altogether, because now CDs were gone and everything was digital, everything was recorded, everything was done through a laptop now, not through audio devices like turntables and stereos and stuff like that. So Candace saw a very similar thing happening to the casino industry as a result of COVID and when the pandemic hit. So casinos, basically, they shut down their buffets. Nobody was buying tickets to the great shows in Las Vegas. And so for about a 6-week period of time, Candace spent almost all of her time writing and studying the topic, and she wrote a number of different blog posts about it. And it was fascinating, the stuff that she was learning and how these organizations were really adapting to the changes were just like, for instance, Cirque du Soleil, they were going bankrupt, because they weren't adapting. They were trying to still do their shows, and they were going broke. Whereas some of these casinos were actually coming out and were much more efficient and more profitable because of some of the adaptations they were making. So anyway, so fantastic topic. And in November, after toward the latter part of the initial COVID crisis, anyway, she started combining all those posts together into a book, and she titled the book Irrawaddy Reinvention. And she found this really cool analogy that was fun. And by the way, I'll link to this in the show notes. So if you want details about the book, you can purchase the book. It's a really fun read. I think you'll enjoy it. But basically what she found out was that there is a specific dolphin. It's called the Irrawaddy dolphin. It's in, I think, the Irrawaddy Sea or goal for whatever it is. But basically, where most animals will have their bodies adapt to the climate or the environment, like an Arctic fox will the fox's fur is white, so it blends in with the snow, right? Polar bears are white, they blend in with the snow. Geckos, change to the color of whatever tree that they're on to blend in. This dolphin didn't have any type of physical adaptation. Everything was mental. This dolphin just kind of changed what he or she was doing in order to eat better. Because what they figured out was that these fishermen would go out every morning and they would lower their nets and raise fish up in their nets. And what the dolphins figured out that they could do is if they could scare the fish into running into those nets, then basically as the nets were rising out of the sea, the dolphins got their pick of the pick of all of the fish that were being caught. And it created this partnership with the fishermen. It was really cool because the only thing that happened was that the dolphin just adapted to what it saw in the marketplace, started doing things differently. And so that's kind of the premise behind her book. So basically what I'm saying here is that all she did was she just wrote a number of different blog posts because she was interested in the topic. She learned a ton about it while she was doing the research. And since she's published the book back in November, she's had a number of really big Fortune 500 companies that have invited her to come speak to their folks and to train their people as a result of it. So if you're able to combine some of your content into books or booklets, it gives you even more credibility in the marketplace. You can do like what Candace did. All right, so once you have the content now written, one of the things that you want to do next is you want to make recordings of you delivering that content that you wrote down. So like, for instance, when you write your content, you want to shoot for between, I would say about 2,000 words to maybe 2,500 words if you're doing a blog post. That's a fairly lengthy blog post, but that way you'll be able to create up to maybe 30 to 45 minutes worth of recorded content if you deliver it word for word. And by the way, all you really have to do is get yourself a great 1080p webcam. They're a couple $100 that you can buy them off of Amazon, and also get a really good microphone, a couple $100 off of Amazon. And then all you have to do is just start a Zoom meeting by yourself and then just record yourself delivering that content. You're going to end up with about 30 minutes of great sounding audio and 30 minutes of great looking video that you can do a lot of cool stuff with. By the way, if you don't feel comfortable speaking to a computer, that's something that's really, really hard. I remember when I first started my podcast, the first couple of these things that I recorded, they were awful. I had to do them over and over and over again because it's just not comfortable. If you're used to speaking to people, speaking to a microphone is much more difficult to do. But if that's the case for you, then just invite a friend. One of the reasons I like using Zoom to do this is that you can invite a friend or a coworker to join you in the meeting. And then if nothing else, you just have a friendly face that you can look at as you're speaking and just pretend like you're speaking to that person. And by the way, if you've started with a great topic and just a few key points, one of the things that you can do is you can make your bullet points into questions and then give your friend those questions to ask of you and make it an interview. You can have your friend or your coworker interview you, and that'll make the whole delivery a little bit more conversational. And by the way, whether you're doing it by yourself or doing it with a friend, that's really one of the most important things, is to make the delivery more conversational, so that when people listen to you, hear you, watch you, it gives the impression that you're speaking directly to them. If you get really good at doing that, you're going to have a much better time, a much easier time anyway. And then the last thing that you want to do is you want to publish your content on that you've created. So you've got these blog posts, you've got maybe even a book or the content of a book written, and you've got some of these recordings. So you want to publish your content. You can do that on your own website. You can do that on your own social media accounts, but you can also post them on other places, and that will help you build up your credibility even more. So now, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, right, it's easier to get your content published. I mean, I own the Leaders Institute. So if I create something, man, I can get it published in 6 minutes, because all I have to do is just upload it to my own blog post. I can upload it to my own social media accounts. I can record my own podcast. I've got a couple of those. If you work for a bigger company, though, it may be a little bit more challenging, but a lot of times you can do the same thing. You can actually submit your content to your marketing department or the people that are in charge of the company's websites, and as long as you get the content approved first, then a lot of times you can use those as your first publishing point as well. By the way, if you haven't yet done that, if you work for one of these big companies and you haven't yet reached out to your marketing department, make sure and do that, because a lot of times they're struggling in many cases to find new content to put up. And a lot of times you'll be their hero. Like, for instance, in my company, the more content that we publish, the more authority that we have. So I never turn down a guest post from any of my expert instructors. These are folks that know exactly what they're doing. And when they have great content, man, we'll put it up in a couple of seconds, right? And there's a good chance that whoever is in charge of the marketing for your company or is in charge of your website probably feels the same way. So send them your content. The worst thing that can happen is they say no. In addition to that, you want to look for industry associations or even trade organizations that publish guest posts. Like, for instance, one of my first instructors was a guy named Ron. He was a CPA. That's what he did for a living. And he got his start in speaking or training by actually writing. He started by writing. The Society of Certified Public Accountants, the organization that does the continuing education for CPAs, they had a monthly newsletter, and this was back in the late 90s, early 2000, mid 2000s, I guess. And so at the time, newsletters, especially physical newsletters that were published on paper, were sent out to the members, and it was the same three people in the local association here in Fort Worth that were writing all of the articles for this newsletter every single month. And so eventually they just kind of ran out of ideas. They ran out of content. And so basically they reached out to a few of their members to ask for contributions. And Ron was one of these people that they reached out to. And so he ended up writing a couple of articles for the association. And then as a result of that, they invited him to be a guest speaker at one of the meetings that they were holding. The audience loved him so much that the association asked him to teach some continuing education classes for the members. And he fell in love with it. He enjoyed teaching so much that eventually he ended up leaving. He had a pretty cushy job, not cushy, but a pretty prominent position. He was a CFO of a big company here in Fort Worth, and he ended up leaving that to go out and being a professional speaker, and started working for my company at the very beginning of that. But this new career all started with him writing a single blog post for the association. And so that's a good source for you to start to publish some of this content once you create it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now. I know some of you are kind of thinking right now, man, Doug, you said that you're going to show us how to get new clients by speaking. However, very little of what you've covered so far has anything at all whatsoever to do with speaking. So what gives? Well, a lot of times the often overlooked part of being a great speaker is to really master your craft first. Master your skill. Whatever it is that you're teaching, you're speaking about, you want to be an absolute master of that before you start speaking. So you can, and by the way, you can be a great speaker, but if what you're saying is kind of gobbledygook, then you're not going to have a lot of loyal followers. So, for example, I get dozens of people every single month wanting to be a guest on the podcast. And the first thing that I do every single time is I Google them. Specifically, I'm looking for recordings of the actual speaker, the person that wants to be a guest on my show. If I can't find any, they're probably not going to be a good. If they've never done any type of recording, if there's no recordings of that person out there, there's a good chance they're probably not going to do very well when I interview them. And by the way, it usually takes me less than maybe 5 minutes now of watching or listening to the person to determine if he or she is really an expert or if they're faking it. If you can't easily tell an audience 2, maybe 3 really tangible tips when you're speaking to them, then there's a good chance that the audience at the end of that conversation is going to think that was a total waste of my time, right? And so the audience is going to be confused. So everything that we've talked about so far is critical to being a good speaker. So basically, all of this preparing your content and getting really good at creating that content is like it. That's the thing that has to be in place first. So now that you've done all the hard work to get there, now let's have some fun getting new clients for your company. And I'm going to show you some really cool things that you can do as a speaker to help generate a ton of new clients.